we go into our dating lives worried that if we say the wrong thing once, if we make too much of a situation or, create a fight, that it's like we have this anxious thought like, oh, it's all over. I've messed it all up. Okay, so we are talking today about what creates successful relationships. And we have, for each of these episodes, we've been putting a poll up on Instagram at the Matthew Hussey for anyone who doesn't follow me currently. What did we put in our poll for this episode?
So we started out with a question which said, which behavior do you see in other people's relationship that you believe makes them succeed? The options were they have the same values, they have great chemistry, and they are in each other's leagues. What do you guys think got the most votes? Great chemistry, in each other's leagues, or have the same values?
I'm going to say because this was what makes a relationship work long term. I'm going to say people said values.
I'm going to say values.
Okay.
Because chemistry, I would say chemistry gets you off the ground. But I think values is what people would say is most important.
You are absolutely correct, the both of you. We then did a follow-up question. And we asked people, if you picked option 1, which is values, what are the most important shared values that you see in those successful relationships? Values around money, values around honesty, values around family, and values around ambition. What do you think got the most votes?
I think it's between honesty and family. Ambition, yes, but I don't think it's like the most important one. It feels like honesty, a lot of people would say, I think.
I'm going to go honesty number 1. Maybe money number 2.
Really?
So the answer is honesty got the most votes by far with 71%.
Whoa.
Family was the second one with 20%.
Okay.
We then had ambition at 6% and money at 3%.
Wow.
Which is really interesting. That makes sense though. I agree. Honesty is the most important of those specific values.
That to me speaks to an enormous amount of an enormous amount of experience people have around betrayal, and people having, whether they've lied, they've cheated, they've gone behind their back on something, but people feel betrayed at the end of a relationship, and that the betrayal led to dishonesty.
Yeah. And people sharing their feelings, communicating well, saying what they think. I think all those things, those are the things that people find the toughest day to day.
You can also probably compromise on things around ambition, family, and money. You can kind of meet in the middle, agree to disagree, but you probably can't do that with honesty.
Do you think that men and women would have voted the same way on this?
Family, honesty, money. What was the last one?
Well, family, honesty, money, ambition. But honesty, I'm wondering if it was an all-male audience. And of course, we have a lot of men in our audience, but I'm wondering if it was all men, they would still be voting the highest for honesty as the reason.
I think so.
I think so. I think if we had put in there something like physical compatibility or sexual compatibility, that would have gone that would have kind of skewed the numbers, especially if men were voting. Because I think men really value kind of sexual compatibility.
I think that would still have been high for women.
But you're screwed without honesty. That's the point, right? You could have enough ambition, enough money. Honesty is kind of one of those things where you feel like, oh, I could always have more.
Yeah.
I could always have more honest in my relationship.
Wait, did you have some data around a research around successful relationships? Because this is very anecdotal. This is obviously taken, I mean, it's, quite a few thousand people actually voted in this poll. I think it was something like 20,000 people. But we have a study from the Gottman Institute, right? So it'd just be interesting to see those numbers.
Yeah, well, I've been just looking at some different things by the Gottman Institute because they are fascinating. It's John and Julie Gottman, a wonderful couple. They are famous for doing these kind of long relationship studies on different couples over time. And a lot of people will be aware of some of their fascinating work. But one of the big things they talk about in communication that we've talked about before is responding how responsive you are to your partner, and specifically responding to what they call their bids for connection. And they even had some data that said successful couples turn toward their partner 86% of the time. So a bid for connection can be literally your partner saying, look at this funny meme. I had a really hard day. They lean in for a hug. Or they say, do you want to grab lunch together later? Any of those are forms of bids for connection. And they say, in terms of success, one of the most important things is how often you turn towards your partner. Literally, they go, make it a goal like, how much can you say yes if your partner is making a bid in that moment? Which is, 86% is a lot, right? Like your partner makes bids, you got to respond 86% of the time.
It's a lot when you consider how many memes Audrey shows me.
I mean, how lucky are you that I send you such funny memes?
And I know you've spoken about how Audrey enjoys talking in your relationship, maybe more than you do. And it says people in the most successful relationships spend 5 more hours a week being together and talking.
That is just the data don't lie, babe. The data don't lie.
The other thing
Thank you, Stephen.
The other thing I think is really fascinating is they talked about this idea of love mapping, where basically it's like getting a sense of your partner's internal world, like the quality of your questions. And so they said things, even just saying, what do you need today? How do you feel about your new job? How are you feeling about the fact you're going to be an auntie or a grandmother? Like you're basically mapping their mind and giving them this open space to kind of, you're basically giving them the floor to share what's been going on. And they call it love mapping. You're like mapping their internal world.
Now, Stephen, I'm curious on your opinion as to women who hear that and say, I feel like if I asked my guy those questions, I would get very short responses. I wouldn't get very open, vulnerable responses. It might even be met with a level of sort of annoyance at having to sort of talk about things in a way that I'm not used to. You know, this isn't every man, of course, but there's a significant portion of men who are not very verbal when it comes to what's going on in their mind. So if you ask a guy a very feeling related question, like, how do you feel about your new role? You might initially be disappointed with the level of response. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that and how, what should someone do if their partner isn't very receptive to that style of questioning?
Yeah, I think you can explore with them. I think it depends on the setting. It can kind of help sometimes if you're doing something else at the same time and then bring up these things so it doesn't feel like an interrogation and it just feels casual. But
like you're going for a walk in the park, and while you're walking and sort of taking in nature and doing an activity, you use that time while their brain isn't occupied by 100 other things, and when it doesn't have the intensity of sitting on the sofa and just staring into each other's eyes, taking that opportunity to get someone to talk.
Yeah, and even being like, oh, do you think any parts of it are going to be difficult? What are you most excited about? Like give something that gives them a chance even to have a concrete answer. Like, what are you most looking forward to in your new job? What thing do you want to do when you go on that trip or when you go home? What's the exciting thing you're going to do? And I think the more questions are kind of gifts. I think a lot of people actually don't get a chance to express themselves as much as they'd like. And men can definitely feel that as well. They can feel like, I don't get to say that because frankly, I never feel it's permitted for me to talk about that. So I think some people are more grateful for it than you think. And yeah, I think we've got to do our own exploring a bit, our own curiosity.
I also think it's about knowing who you're speaking to. If you know that you're speaking to somebody who's not really connected to their emotions, and what you're trying to get is, are they feeling, nervous about the restructuring at work? You can just be like, how was your day today? Did anything happen? How's that restructuring going? How's that? You can kind of just ask questions and almost open up the floor for the conversation to be had, rather than are you feeling anxious about the restructuring? Are you having any negative emotions you want to talk about? Which I think would be a bit overwhelming for someone who's not comfortable talking about their feelings. So I think you can go into it as well in a way that is suitable for the different personalities you're speaking to.
Like, what's it like? Is, how does it feel to be in the middle of that? Or that sounds kind of tough.
And
does it feel tough? Like, what does it feel like for you? Like, it's sort of setting them up with neutral questions that allow them to take it in any direction they want.
Yeah, and then the point I'm imagining in this is that what you're doing is you're giving, to your point, Stephen, you're giving your partner the opportunity to speak about something, which sometimes I think you don't feel like you have permission to speak, or you don't want to talk about something because you're scared it's going to be boring or it's going to be indulgent. And to almost say to your partner, I'm thinking of you and your experience and what's going on in your world, and I'm sort of being generous with my time to take the time to ask you about it. Even if you don't have the best answer for it, even just knowing that your partner cares enough to remember to ask you, I think is really meaningful.
Yeah. You do something which is lovely, where you will ask me, what do you need today? Like, what's a way that I could support you today?
That's one of the ones they mention as a mapping. It can just be that. They said, what do you need today? Yeah, they said that can be a really, really powerful one. The other thing they said is, we've talked about this before, but this golden ratio of positive to negative interactions, they say is you want 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. And in bad couples, you have 0.8 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. So basically you want this ratio of 5 to 1. And those positives can be anything from a moment of appreciation, shared laughter, doing something nice together, having a good meal, whatever, for every 1 moment of, something that niggles you.
Like cheat meals. You the 80-20 rule, eat well 80% of the time, and then on the weekends.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's something to that. I've been sort of taking care of myself in the last few months, and I've been pretty consistent with it in terms of, working out and doing jiu-jitsu and eating well. And one of the things I'm reminded of, which I always find really encouraging when it comes to trying to be healthy, is that you actually don't need to be nearly as perfect as you think you do when you're scared about being healthier. You know what I mean? When you're overwhelming yourself with the idea of eating well and the idea of working out and all of the discomfort that those things bring up for many of us, myself included, that I'm actually always pleasantly surprised with, if I'm consistent, I actually can mess up a lot more than I think, and still my trajectory is good. And there's something comparable there with relationships, that I think a lot of people, especially anxious people, go into relationships feeling like they have to be perfect, feeling like they can't put a foot wrong. We go into our dating lives worried that if we say the wrong thing once, if we make too much of a situation, or, create a fight, that it's like we have this anxious thought like, oh, it's all over. I've messed it all up. I should never have said that. I should never have done that. I've had that thought before where I'm like, I should never have sent that text. I've screwed it all up now. I've done it. But actually what's encouraging is that you can have those moments where things go wrong. You can have those moments where you have an unnecessary argument, or where you say the wrong thing. You just have to make sure that the trajectory of the relationship continues in a really positive direction. And the way you do that is by having, 5 positives to every 1 negative interaction.
And the key insight here is frequency matters. Like, in a way, it's the frequency of affectionate. It's not good enough once a month we have grand affection day and we have sex and we go out and it's all sweet.
Grand affection day.
It's like, it's like the thing of like, oh, we have amazing sex once every 5 weeks. It's like, no, actually the frequent affection is much more important than the grand gesture. And that's kind of one of the key insights. And even if your partner shares something they did and you like, that's the moment, like, show you're proud of them. Oh, that's amazing. You did that. What happened? Tell me about it. What did they say? Those are the moments to like amplify frequently, when your partner
I
shares
would also add to that, like, you know, you can have negative interactions with your partner, but so much of kind of the impact of those negative and positive reactions is what happens afterwards, like how you repair from those things. Because if you do have an argument and you kind of like, it's an unnecessary argument about something stupid, even if it's like a really big fight, like if you then go, I'm just gonna pretend it didn't happen, not mention it and carry on, that's where you actually start to build resentment. Versus, like, I think repairing is such a strengthening of the relationship, because I think fighting and arguing is actually really important. And, you know, you have phases in your life where you argue more or less, and you have moments where maybe you're overcoming something together that's like a big thing, and so you're fighting a lot about one thing until you've resolved it. But I really believe that couples that never ever argue, it's usually because one or both of them is just not really expressing what they're feeling, and they're not communicating the things that they're struggling with, the things that are in their minds. And when that happens, all that happens is that then resentment builds up, and eventually it explodes in this thing that's really, really toxic and unhealthy. And sometimes it even results in just a breakup. I have always loved my bed. I remember when I went to university when I was 18, I went out, and with money I did not have as an 18-year-old, I bought some fancy pillows, a fancy quilt, some fancy bedding, and a mattress topper, because my bed has always been literally the most important thing to me. I've always washed my bed sheets once a week, and I'm obsessed with making my bed the comfiest, like, softest, most lovely place to be. You know how much time I spend in bed.
Yeah, you're like a sloth.
I mean, or
you weren't going to say that.
Something nicer, maybe.
Sloths are cute.
I just love it. And for the last few years now, we have been using what I consider to be the best bed sheets that I have ever found. And I'm a bed sheet connoisseur.
You are. This is true.
I really am. The brand is Cozy Earth, and we love their stuff, guys. We really do. We use their pajamas. Matt, you said you were wearing their socks?
I'm wearing their socks right now.
High praise for you.
They're the comfiest socks I have.
You're very picky about socks.
I've been wearing their socks. I've been wearing their shorts at night. I intend to get some pajamas. I want to order a set of the bed sheets for when we go back to my mum's house
we have
in
spares.
England.
I have spares.
So that's happening. The bed sheets for me, you know, I have a real problem with overheating in the middle of the night.
Oh my God, you guys, if Matt had his way, we would live in an igloo.
Yes, that would be my preference. But since we can't, I'm very happy with these bed sheets because I actually sleep through the night. They have a 3-month return policy, by the way. So if you try the bed sheets and you don't love them, you have 3 months to return them. There's a 10-year warranty that protects your investment. But the stuff is really great. We've never wanted to return anything. We love it. And right now we have a discount code, which is Love Life, that if you use that at cozyearth.com, you get a 40% discount on anything on the site. So go over to cozyearth.com, use the discount code Love Life and get 40% off. What do you say to people who, when they fight, they have very different styles around the repairing after the argument? So one of them, let's say, is a much more anxious type who wants to repair it immediately. They're just like, we had a fight, like they don't want to go another 20 minutes without making it right. And another person, let's say, needs space. They're more on the avoidance side, where they're just like, the way I need to come back to the table is by going away, processing, thinking, getting space, and then coming back. But of course, that's exactly the thing that riles up the anxious person, because it gives them all what seems like an eternity to process 1,000 different thoughts that are catastrophic about, they're going to break up with me, I've ruined the whole thing, we're never going to be okay again. Like all of that comes out in that time. So one person, it feels productive for them to go away, but the other person feels like, I can't trust you to go away. You may never come back. I need to fix this now. What do you say to people who have those different time frames on repairing?
First and foremost, there's a question mark around compatibility, because I do think that there are some people where if their kind of style is so drastic from yours and you need completely different things in moments, it can be a sign of incompatibility. But before jumping to that conclusion, I think, it's all about the communication, right? You can literally say to your partner, I have noticed that when we argue, you need some space. But for me, I just need you to know when you ask for space, it makes me really anxious. It really evokes this sense that I'm not safe, that you're never going to come back. I obviously have some abandonment wounds going on in there. I'm obviously struggling with that, but I just need you to know that, because it would mean a lot to me if we could come up with a system where your needs are being respected in that moment, because I don't want to ambush you, because I appreciate for you, that's what you need. But also my needs are being met. And it might be that we say let's take some time and regroup in 1 hour. It might be that, you say to me, I want you to know I need some space, but you're not unsafe. I love you. This doesn't change anything between us. I need a little bit of space to process this, because that's what I need. I think that you can come up with something where you can sort of compromise in the middle about what each other needs. But I think what's really important to remember, if you're an anxious person or if you're somebody who is more avoidant and needs that space, your partner needs the thing you need as much as you do, even though it's the complete polar opposite need. And I think connecting to that can be a helpful thing, because you start to realize they're not being selfish by needing some space to run away and take their time. They're actually doing exactly what they need, which is exactly they need it as much as I need them to be there, and I need to resolve it right now. It's just because the needs are different doesn't mean that they're not just as powerful for the other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think throughout the process, you still have to communicate affection and love, even when you are taking space or fighting. And there is a thing I was reading about your fighting style, and the couples that fight well tend to diffuse tension by either showing humor, expressing affection, conceding on certain points their partner makes, and you don't stonewall.
Yeah, that's so true.
You have to still show some modicum of I'm caring about you in this process. I'm not just walking off to potentially never speak to you again. You need to show safety.
That idea of conceding on some of your partner's points is really, really underrated, and it's so powerful. When you're in the middle of an argument where you've both got the weapons out and you're both coming at each other, and it has now become a situation where you are so entrenched in your way of thinking and they're so entrenched in theirs, it becomes so unconscious at that point that it has the potential to spiral out of control. And that's where you say things and behave in ways that you end up looking back and going, God, that was a really ugly side of me that came out. And that was a really ugly side of them that came out. We've all been there where someone on the other side of an argument concedes on something, says, when you say that, I get it. I get what you're saying there, and that makes sense. And you know what? I'm sorry for that. When you hear that from someone, you immediately soften. Your body language softens, your tone softens, and it begins a kind of a new spiral that starts to ease up the tension. And to me, there's the physical equivalent of that is where you're fighting and you're sitting in silence after a fight, and one person decides to just extend their pinky to
a toe
grab. Yeah. You just feel one finger on their hand sort of, grab yours. And you then do the same. Maybe you move your hand by an inch, and it's the tiniest thing, but it's this tiny miniature pinky sized olive branch that makes you soften a little bit. And there are physical equivalents of that, like the one I just mentioned, and then there are verbal equivalents of that, like what you're saying, conceding on something which says to someone, may have thought the rules of the game were, let's each be right about everything. And what you're saying without saying it when you concede on something is, just so you know, that's not the rules of this game. It's much more interesting than that. You can be right and I can be right. I can be empathetic and you can be empathetic. We can arrive in a place together where neither of us stand where we originally started. And something more interesting comes out of this. And when someone understands that those are the rules of the game, there's a good chance they start playing by those rules instead of the rules they thought, which is, don't avoid any kind of wound whatsoever. Avoid any kind of, do not admit any weakness whatsoever. And that's not to get political, but that's to me, that is the problem out there right now, is that there is so little nuance and it's the rules of the game are be right about everything.
And be unbendable.
Be unbendable. Never admit wrong, never admit weakness, never admit that you can be wrong about anything. And that's such a boring game to be playing because we all know it's just not true. On both sides, we all know it's just not true.
Yeah.
On both ends of the spectrum, whichever side you're coming from. It cannot be true that you're right about everything.
Yeah.
And it cannot be true that they're right about everything. And it can't be true that we never make mistakes. If you look at so much of the world right now, those are the rules of the game that have been set up. And that's why the relationship between people is horrible. It's why we have a terrible relationship with each other, many of us. And if you say that's on a macro level what creates horrible relationships between different sides in a country, it's the same thing in a couple. And if you want a different relationship, you have to start playing by a different set of rules.
You know what's really interesting about that is I think as well, remembering you're not adversaries is so important. When you're in a relationship, you are a team. And so when you fight, it's almost what's the end goal in mind? Is the end goal to be right and to prove your partner that you are right and that they are wrong and they need to make it up to you? Or is the end goal to come out stronger? If it's to come out stronger, it's not going to be binary like that. And that's a really important thing going into it when you're fighting is having your end goal in mind. And also I will add this, which I think is really worth talking about, is the resentments that lead to those arguments becoming toxic. Because I think as well, if along the way you haven't articulated and spoken about your resentments and the things that you're feeling, it's almost for instance, let's say you feel like your partner doesn't give you enough of their time. And you're feeling this, but you haven't really articulated it. And then at the last minute, they cancel on you for something. So you go, you're so selfish. I can't believe you would cancel on me. And they're like, what are you talking about? There's a really good reason. My boss has asked me to stay. I don't have an option. You're being really aggressive right now. I can't believe you're speaking to me like this. And that would be a very common argument, or, that's the kind of skeleton of a very common argument. But the reason that person's fighting is not because they're canceling that one time. It's because they don't feel valued in these 20 other situations that have happened before. And if you haven't communicated that, or if somebody isn't self-aware enough to go, actually, I haven't made my partner a priority, so this reaction is probably because they don't feel made a priority and it makes them feel undervalued, then you can if you're not doing that, you can almost take the argument too much at face value. Instead of going, there's a reason. If I believe my partner is a reasonable, rational, kind person who wants the best for our relationship, if I really truly believe that and they are having this reaction, I need to investigate why that reaction is happening. I need to be compassionate to the fact that they're feeling this way because there's a reason they're feeling this way. And they wouldn't be, maybe they are being irrational, but that's unlikely if their track record is that they're a very rational person. So I think there's also, that going on where people aren't necessarily nuanced about the root of the argument and they're fighting the wrong problem and they're not doing it together.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. It's like you're fighting the single battle instead of the actual conflict you're having.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to pull it out from the root.
There's a thing you said that does relate to the Gottman's advice, which is very interesting. You were talking about people being unbendable. One of the things they say is most important in good relationships is allowing yourself to be influenced. by your partner.
That's such a good line. Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah, they said basically it shows you value their impact, you respect them and what they have to say. And basically they said, even in heterosexual relationships, when men resist influence from their partners, the couple's 81% more likely to break up. Like if you don't allow the fact both ways that my partner has some better ideas than I do, my partner has some ways of living, my partner has thoughts, that I need to accept some of their influence.
But that's because respect is so important in the functioning of a relationship. Like if you respect your partner, that's kind of everything.
But that gets into some interesting gender dynamics though, where I'm seeing more and more rhetoric from a certain subset of guys who want to believe that they should be in charge. You know, I did a Red Table Talk episode with Jada Pinkett and a whole group of people where there was some very vocal male opinions around the table about how the guy should be in charge, the guy should be the ultimate decision maker. And I sat there kind of slightly in horror because I was like, this is, firstly, that's a mandate for an abusive relationship, period. Mm-hmm. And there are no shortage of women who have been in relationships where it's like the guy's like, I'm calling the shots, I'm in charge, I'm the decision maker, and that creates a kind of dictatorship within a relationship. But when you start to kind of proselytize about that idea, what you get is a bunch of guys who feel that by to be influenced by the woman in their life, to believe that to say you had a better idea than me, let's go with what you said because that's actually better, or you're teaching me lots of things, I'm learning a lot from you. To say that would be to disrespect yourself as a man in the relationship who's supposed to be the one in control. And there's something incredibly secure about men who can be in a relationship and do this. It's interesting that the Gottmans back it up with their research that when a guy can't be influenced by the woman in his life, the relationship is far more likely to fail. And what's interesting,
I think it goes both ways as well. Like
it goes, absolutely. But I'm saying, I think there's a cultural thing. And I think especially because of the kind of rhetoric I'm talking about, men have more baggage around the idea of being receptive to the great ideas from the woman in their life. And and that to me is a tremendous shame. And it's a bit like what you're saying, Steve, is the Gottmans are saying, respect is at the heart of successful relationships. But that is what I think what a lot of relationships suffer from is a guy feeling that he's not being respected if he's not being called amazing all the time for every idea he's having, and if he's actually being receptive to good ideas from the outside, not least of which from the woman in his life. So you've got like two ideas of what respect is there that are butting up against each other.
Yeah. And I just think in any partnership like that, it's just not going to be possible if you're like basically saying I'm a fixed entity and I can't learn from you. It's like sort of like what are we doing here? What's the point? And if we're already like these finished products, and B, you're not showing that curiosity, you're not showing that openness. And it's very like, it's an unattractive quality, not being open, right? It's just...
Can you talk about also the thing you shared with me before the show about successful couples bringing out the best in each other?
Yeah, so there was this really great point that I loved, and me and Audrey were talking about how couples that are the happiest bring out the best in each other. And this is called the Michelangelo effect, but it's basically you help each other move closer towards your ideal selves. It's kind of like Michelangelo, it's like you're seeing the sculpture within the marble, but it's like, it's not living for someone's potential, but it's like you water each other like a flower and you both grow and help each other form into that version.
And you know how I think, because I love this, and I actually believe this is what you and I have done for each other. We've talked about it before. I've never heard it be referred to as the Michelangelo effect, but this idea of like, I really like who I am when I'm with you, and I really like the person you make me. I think, I was thinking about it, and I think the way to do that is to actually focus on your partner's positive traits and to reaffirm back to them the things that you really appreciate about them and you think that are really valuable about them. If you're like, you know, I've noticed you're such a hardworking and kind and person full of integrity, and I really, really love that about you. That's going to make them want to do those things more. It's going to make them want to almost kind of like, well, I want to live up to this image that you have of me, because I like feeling this way. I like feeling like you think that I'm a kind person. I'm hardworking. I have a lot of integrity. I like those things about myself. So I'm gonna double down on those traits because I want you to keep thinking that about me.
I also think that it makes you more receptive to feedback, because if you feel really, loved and admired for the person that you are, when someone then draws attention to something that they think, they need more of, or an area that you could improve in, you're more receptive to that because you've got almost a foundation of confidence. Don't forget to go and sign up to the brand new event, Dating Made Simple, that's happening on the 20th of May. You can sign up at lovelifetraining.com. This is going to be a really exciting event for anyone who is looking for love but feels like it's the Wild West out there. They keep running into people they don't really like, or that they like, but it never goes anywhere. No one seems to want to commit. You're struggling to get momentum in the early stages of dating. You want a relationship, but my God, is dating horrible. If any of that describes your state of mind around this, make sure you are there on May 20th. I am going to make it much, much more simple for you to find love. You can sign up at lovelifetraining.com. And thank you for listening to this episode. Go follow us on our Instagram podcast handle at LoveLifePod. Leave us a review on Apple as well, if you wouldn't mind. It would mean a lot to us. Help spread the word about these episodes. That would mean the world. And email us if you do, podcast@matthewhussey.com. We want to know who you are. Until next time, thank you for being here and have a wonderful week.